Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines this hour. The US Department of Justice releases its largest batch yet of documents related to Jeffrey Epstein, following several drops over the weekend. Many files remain heavily redacted despite a legal deadline to publish all records by Friday. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia launches a massive overnight attack using more than 600 drones and 30 missiles, killing at least 3. Ukraine reports emergency power outages as Poland scrambles jets in response to the strikes. Australia's most populous state moves to pass tougher gun laws, ban terrorist symbols and curb protests after the Bondi mass shooting. The emergency legislation is expected to clear the New South Wales Parliament on Tuesday. The United Nations says Myanmar's military junta is using brutal violence and intimidation to force people to take part in upcoming votes. The UN warns the tactics undermine any credibility of the polls and deepen the country's human rights crisis. China urges the United States to fulfill its nuclear disarmament responsibilities after a Pentagon report says Beijing is expanding its missile force. Beijing says Washington should create conditions for all nuclear states to disarm and rejects claims it opposes arms control. 5 Pakistani police officers are killed after their van is hit by a bomb and gunfire in the country's northwest, police have said. Authorities say the attack involves explosives followed by shooting, with no claim of responsibility so far. President Donald Trump says the United States needs Greenland for national security and says his newly appointed envoy will lead the effort. The appointment of Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry draws fresh criticism from Denmark and Greenland. Syrian government forces and the Kurdish-led SDF agreed to stop fighting in the northern city of Aleppo after deadly clashes. Damascus says the army is ordered to halt attacks on SDF fighters following violence that kills at least 2 civilians. Those are the headlines this hour, but we begin in the United States, and the US Department of Justice just released over 8,000 new documents related to Jeffrey Epstein, marking one of the largest public disclosures in the investigation so far. The files include hundreds of video and audio recordings, including surveillance footage from August 2019, the month that Epstein died in jail, awaiting trial on federal sex trafficking charges. The rollout has drawn criticism, with users reporting broken links and empty pages. Lawmakers and victims' advocates say the release remains heavily redacted and incomplete. Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act to ensure full disclosure, but frustration continues over delays and opaque redactions. Bipartisan lawmakers, including Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie, have threatened legal action against Attorney General Pam Bondi for non-compliance. Deputy AG Todd Blanche defended the redactions, citing protection of victims' identities and denied any shielding of President Donald Trump, a past Epstein associate. Despite the new release, questions remain over whether all required documents have been made public. Joining us now is Dan Perry, a world affairs analyst, and he joins us live from Tel Aviv. Dan, thank you very much for joining us. A new chapter in this long-running saga and a new drop. We see more of the same, more redactions, more black spaces. How do you expect this to play out? The Justice Department is releasing thousands of these documents, yet we don't really seem to get any new information. Is this what transparency is called?
No, this is what a cover-up is called, very clearly. I think the real story here is the a chasm of distrust between old school Americans from both parties and the current administration, where I don't think too many people have faith that the Justice Department under Pam Bondi is going to be truly transparent. Now, there's a complex issue here. True transparency risks privacy violations against people who may have had very poor judgment and maybe a version of guilt by association, but might not have committed any crimes and could face trial by public opinion. All these names that appear in the Epstein files, flight logs and photos perhaps of what were just monumental social events that seem to have ensnared much of the American political class. So you have an incredibly a deep and broad scandal here with this pedophile and sex trafficker Epstein having befriended so much of America's political class that it really is stunning. Now, who is involved in actual criminality is an open question that likely will not be answered, even by fully transparent disclosure of these files. But what we clearly see is that the Justice Department and FBI have released thousands and thousands of files, but they're so heavily redacted that it raises more questions than it answers. It basically answers no questions, and by law they would have to explain each and every redaction, and they have not done that at all. So expect challenges, expect deepening suspicions, expect anger, and expect massive distraction from the other extremely impactful issues of the day that the administration is also visiting upon the United States and the rest of the planet.
Dan, do you think this will have damage for Donald Trump's administration? Not, of course, just for Democrats, but of course within his own base of Republicans. This has been the solely uniting issue throughout Donald Trump's second tenure as president, something that both Democrats and Republicans voted on together to release this. How do you think it's going to play out?
It has potential to cause damage for sure. There are two ways to look at this. One is that the Republicans have proven to be such lemmings and such toadies, existing in such cowering fear of being primaried by Trump's mob, that there really is nothing that Trump can do that would cause them to abandon him, true to his statement from about 8 years ago that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and get away with it. Sadly, events have proven that to be basically correct, if overly colorful, at least as regards the Republican Party that has proven to be absolutely pathetic. However, all things must end, and there are signs of nascent rebellions here and there in the party, a little bit over Israel, somewhat perhaps over the illegal tariffs. We'll see at the Supreme Court about that. Mainly the rebellion could happen over the Epstein files, where there is more than a sense that part of the cover-up might attach to the fact that we know that President Donald Trump himself, at least for a time, was close to Epstein. And that is such a bad look that it is conceivable that even a party as craven and as cowering as the Republicans might finally have had enough. And there is, I suppose, suspicion that that is behind part of the redactions.
Yes, Dan, do stay with us as we move over to Australia for our next story. And Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has called Israeli President Isaac Herzog to express his shock and dismay over last week's attack at a Jewish community Hanukkah event on Bondi Beach. During the call, Albanese invited Herzog to visit Australia, emphasising the importance of solidarity with the Jewish community. President Herzog said he would accept the invitation. He also noted that the president of the Zionist Federation of Australia had sent a formal invitation reinforcing the community's desire for his visit. Albanese shared the update on X. Dan joins us once again. Dan, there's been several interactions now post the tragic Bondi shooting between members of the Israeli government and the Australian authorities. How have you yourself analysed those interactions? Of course, now we see a seemingly good interaction between Herzog and Albanese, but this wasn't the case with Benjamin Netanyahu, who of course blamed Australia's decision to recognise a Palestinian state as one of the factors contributing to this attack.
Australia obviously is shocked at the massacre on Bondi Beach and is attempting to take action as best it can,
Hmm.
and obviously may have woken up a bit too late to the need to crack down on anti-Semitic agitation in that country. There has been some tension between Australia and Israel over Australia's decision to recognize a Palestinian state, which uh, the Israeli government, but also many Israelis in general, believed was premature and unhelpful
Hmm.
because it had the effect of seeming to reward Hamas for having started the cataclysmic war with a genocidal attack on Israel on October 7th. So that tension is there. Netanyahu, of course, tried to make political hay out of all this and immediately made a false connection, I believe, between that action by Australia and the attack on Jews on Hanukkah on Bondi Beach. That's typical Netanyahu. Netanyahu has basically a position in the world where he's part of the populist right, a group of leaders that is very much at odds with liberal governments around the world, which includes the government of Albanese in Australia. Um, we see here something entirely different.
Hmm.
Australia trying to reach out to, let's say, mainstream Israel, not this current right wing government that may well be defenestrated in the coming election. And that mainstream, moderate, and one might even be tempted to say normal Israel, traditionally normal Israel, is represented by President Isaac Herzog, who comes from the Labor Party, the center left in Israel, who is by no means, who is by no means in any way connected to the populist right around the world, and if anything, is sort of a bird of a feather with Australia's own government. So I'm not surprised that the effort to make up by the two countries focuses on Herzog and not on Netanyahu, who realistically is persona non grata, who'd probably be arrested if he came to Australia and is not likely to be invited anytime soon.
Yeah, indeed. Dan, do stay with us once again as we move on. But we have some breaking news coming in, however. And Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg was detained by UK police today during a protest in central London. She held up a placard stating, "I support Palestine action. I oppose genocide," outside of the offices of the Aspen Insurance Building. Thunberg was reportedly arrested under the UK's Terrorism Act for expressing support for Palestine Action, a direct action group banned by the UK government in July and is also registered as a terrorist group under UK law. Dan Perry joins us once again to discuss this. Dan, of course, this has been a hugely polarising and very visceral crackdown on this group, Palestine Action, in the United Kingdom. You have scenes of old people, disabled people being arrested for holding up placards. How does how do people in Israel view what's going on in the UK right now in regards to Palestine Action in London?
You have to remember Israel is very much divided between the right and the left, basically, supporters of the government and people who oppose it viscerally. But there is, I think, an area of consensus, an area of consensus in the notion that Europe in general, and this includes somewhat comically the UK despite Brexit, has been far too tolerant of Islamist jihadism in all its forms. And this and it takes many forms. One of them is the agitation for Sharia law, proselytizing of points of view, basically anti-gay, highly patriarchal and anti-feminist points of view that are being disseminated through mosques attached to Wahhabism and other preachers around the continent that are antithetical to the liberal European ethos. And there is a real question that Europe faces about how to be liberal with forces that are illiberal and what to do about an immigrant community that may represent those forces to an uncomfortably great measure. If you still seek diversity and appreciate immigration, what do you do with immigrants that don't want to assimilate? These are complex issues. And I think the view on Israel and the position that Israel had conducted a genocide in Gaza, which I believe is false, for the simple reason that it ended the minute Israel got the hostages back. The goal was not the elimination of a people, but the return of the hostages. Um, that is seen by many in Israel as part and parcel of the broader jihadist agitation that you have in Europe, that primarily is not a question of Israel, even though it might lead to anti-Semitic attacks on Jews, but is really a question of what Europe wants to do with this major challenge. Now, I agree it's a huge problem for Europe, but at the same time, it's also exaggerated for political reasons. We see the recent national security strategy put out by Donald Trump out of the US, basically claiming that Europe faces civilizational erasure because of the migration challenge. And that's ridiculous because Europe has maybe 6% Muslims. And if you count all immigrants, 15%, maybe 20, depending on how liberal you are with the definition of immigrant. The national security strategy plainly is talking about preserving white Europe, and America itself
Yeah.
is way more diverse than Europe. So it can be ridiculous, this attack on Europeans, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a real challenge. And much the fulcrum of what I call the agitation has focused on the Gaza war that was deployed by these anti-Western groups, and that includes, sadly enough, Ms. Thunberg and her fellow travelers, to attack Western civilization in general.
Yes, Dan, do stay with us once again as we move on over to West Asia. And Yemen's Iran-backed Houthi rebels and its government have agreed to a prisoner swap that includes nearly 3,000 people in total, including 7 Saudis, as per reports. Majed Fadhiel, a member of the government delegation for the prisoner swap talks, says they agreed with the Houthis on a new exchange that would see thousands of war prisoners released. Abdul Qadir al-Mu'tada, an official with the Houthi delegation, said in a statement on X that an agreement had been signed today with the other party to implement a large-scale prisoner exchange deal, including 1,400 Houthi prisoners in exchange for 1,200 of Iran, including 7 Saudis and 23 Sudanese. Dan Perry joins us once again. Dan, a swap involving nearly 3,000 prisoners here, sounding pretty dramatic. Do you think this is a serious step towards de-escalation?
No, I think this is a blip in the narrative. It's obviously very good for the people being released. It might enable Saudi Arabia to slink away from its Yemen entanglement. But I think mainly it is an effort by the Houthis to further the narrative that there is somehow a legitimate player who can be counted on to conduct rational activity like a prisoner exchange. And in the very fact that they're being dealt with on that level, there is an acquiescence to their presence, or more correctly stated, their occupation of much of Yemen, including the capital, Sana'a. There are 2 ways to view the Houthis. One is that at the end of the day, countries, through violence or electoral process or whatever, create leaderships, and the world has to just deal with it, even if those leaderships are unfortunate and cause damage to those very countries. And perhaps even there can be a measure of redemption. We see in Syria, the current president that has a lot of support around the world, is a former jihadist. So he's basically been forgiven. And there's even a Christian narrative about how one can rise above one's past and the folly of one's youth. Maybe that applies to the Houthis. My own view is that it does not. The Houthis are an Iran-backed cancer upon Yemen. They have caused almost 500,000 deaths in Yemen. Their slogan is death to America and death to Israel. They're obviously a member of the benighted array of militias that is willing to bring the house down upon their own people in order to further jihadist aims. They have disrupted a quarter of global maritime trade. They've done Egypt untold damage by disrupting the Suez Canal and traffic through it. And they are just a blight upon the long-suffering people of Yemen. I personally am not a warmonger in the slightest, but I think in some cases you have to challenge such nefarious groups, and the Houthis probably should be fought by the entire planet. How to do that without without bringing more suffering to the people of Yemen that are sadly under the boot of the Houthis is a very, very open question. It's just a tragedy for Yemen that these criminals are in charge of much of the country and its main port at Hodeidah.
Dan Perry, as always, it's a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you very much for taking the time and joining us. We now move on, and a small number of Syrian Christians are returning to their homes in the countryside of Idlib after years of displacement caused by the war. In recent weeks, around 20 residents have gone back to the devastated village of Al-Ghassanieh more than a decade after fleeing Islamic State fighters. Before the conflict, the village was home to several thousand people. Local officials say those who returned are slowly repairing damaged houses and trying to rebuild daily life. Residents describe the return as emotional, especially during the Christmas season, which many spent away from home in the past years. They say they hope more families will come back, even briefly, to restore a sense of community. Syria's Christian population, once around 10% of the country, has fallen sharply due to emigration during the conflict. Let's listen in to some residents.
بأول عيد بالغسانية وعملنا صلاة وعملنا لقاية كبيرة مع المطارنة، وهلأ بكرة على العيد شعورنا ما بتنوصف، مبسوطين ومكيفين نحن ونسواننا وطفالنا وجوارينا. من 15 سنة لهلأ فرقت معنا كتير. نحن هلأ شايفين حالنا دح ومبسوطين ومكيفين بمسقط راسنا، ورحنا زرنا أبهاتنا وأجدادنا بالمقابر وصلينا اللي بنعرفه.
We move on now, and as Beijing looks to close the gap with the United States aerospace company SpaceX, the first stage of China's reusable Long March 12A was not successfully recovered during the rocket's inaugural flight, as per its developer. The rocket took off at 2 o'clock GMT from the Dongfeng Commercial Space Innovation Pilot Zone in northwestern China. China's Aerospace and Science Technology Cooperation said that the second stage of the rocket did successfully enter its planned orbit. The Long March 12A's maiden flight marked China's second attempt at landing and recovering a rocket booster for use in further launches. Details of the failed recovery, including its cause, were not disclosed, but the CASC said it was conducting a comprehensive review of the entire test process. It would also make every effort to determine the cause of the incident. China has in recent years launched dozens of rockets that deliver satellites into orbit, but has yet to successfully complete a reusable rocket test, which requires the rocket's large lower section, known as the first stage or booster, to be landed and recovered after launch. With Elon Musk's SpaceX having mastered this capability several years ago, Chinese private and state-owned rocket firms are rushing to test domestically developed reusable rockets. Joining us now is Andrew K.P. Leung. He's a China strategist and he joins us live from Hong Kong. Andrew, thank you very much for joining us. Of course, there is a technological race between the United States and China. Of course, the United States currently in ahead, but how far behind is Beijing?
Considering how far behind China had been for several decades behind the United States space mission, China's indeed made remarkable progress with the construction and operation of its own space station from scratch, having been excluded from the American-led International Space Station, which co-opted Russia, but not China from the very start. In addition, China, of course, successfully recovered samples from the backside of the moon. However, in terms of reusable rockets, China is still considerable distance behind, with the latest second failure attempt to recover the orbital rockets. And of course, the United States is the only country, and Elon Musk is the only company capable of launching and recovering such rockets. But China, of course, is pushing ahead with its space program, having successfully launched many space missions, and the China's International Space Station is still operating very smoothly. And then the last effort to carry the astronauts back because of a defective space kind of capsule, also suggests that China had a lot of plans and measures at the back to back up its space mission. The space mission still remains on target, 2030, with a crew lunar landing and an establishment of an international research station, and hence the importance of these recoverable rockets, because they would make the future international space station involving the cooperation of other countries and participation in countries more cost effective. But then, of course, the recent failure is a setback. But it doesn't mean that China is going to let up on this space mission. In fact, that all the resources are put behind it because it is a very important element of the China's second centenary goals of becoming a strong and scientifically advanced country by 2049, which is the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Republic of China.
Yes, Andrew KP Leung, thank you very much as always for speaking to us here on the channel. It's always a pleasure to have you. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international updates. Thank you.